discussion, like I'm elevated above, like. Okay, hi, I'm Rick. I know a few of you, but I see a lot of unfamiliar faces here. First, I would like to thank Michael for inviting me down to talk. I recently for me, about 2 years ago, moved to Washington, D.C., so that made a lot of these West Coast events more accessible. East Coast events. I was in Seattle for a bunch of years before that, and so I felt sort of disconnected from a lot of the community. I only saw people when I traveled for work. So speaking of which, I'm the Vice President of Engineering for, I just got a new job title. I am the Vice President for Ubuntu and Engineering Services. And so we're the team that makes like all the client parts of Ubuntu, and we also make the kernel and foundations, which the cloud team uses. So roughly Canonical is divided between cloud and client, or cloud and devices now. And I'm the vice president of the devices team, basically, essentially. And I've been at Canonical since 2008. And so what I did for this presentation was I just went through and looked through like a bunch of my old blog posts and just all kinds of stuff, and looked for anything where I could find images which triggered memories about fun or crazy things that have happened over the years since we started with Ubuntu. So as I'm going through, please feel free to interrupt me with questions or interjections, etc. I hope this triggers some fond memories for some people, although some of these may not be such fond memories for me, but we'll see what. So let me start from the beginning, was 904. This was, does anyone recognize this, where this is? Yeah, the second Mountain View UDS, which was my first UDS. So, which was my second week of work at Canonical. So back then we would take engineering managers. I was the engineering manager of the desktop, and they said, here, run this track at UDS. It had kind of a being shot out of the cannon feel to it. And this was everyone at UDS. I'm going to contrast to a picture of the Copenhagen UDS later in the slides. But this was everybody. And it seemed like a lot of people at the time, but over the years, we kind of came to see these as the quaint times. So this is what the desktop looked like then. Does anyone remember like this fabulous brown that was like super revolutionary? We still have the little drum beat when you log in. I remember I was so proud, like when I started working for Canonical and I was showing one of my friends Ubuntu, and he was like, why don't they get a designer to make some nice colors? I said, well, there's a story there, but we'll leave that go. So 904, what was the big thing that happened in 904? Was a big thing that happened at that Mountain View UDS was that we started a team called the DX team, and they rolled out this new interface concept called, I don't even know, desktop experience. Okay, the desktop experience team. There was like 4 of them at the time or something. And they rolled out this thing. It was called NotifyOSD, and the idea was to have a nicer notification system that wasn't distracting and just gave a better experience. And this turned out to be incredibly controversial. Like there were 2 things about it. One of them was that the design was made so that you could be notified and see what's happening on your desktop, but you weren't like forced to respond to it. There weren't actions on there which you had to respond to in time. So there's no actions on the notifications. And this is 2008, fall of 2008, I guess. You would think like the world was ending, like the degree of anxiety that this caused people was just over the top. And little was I, to know at the time that this was just like the first of many interesting controversies to come as we were designing Ubuntu. So that's NotifyOSD, my second week of work at Canonical, working on the desktop team. let's see what else we have here. So this was, yeah. So when I got to Canonical, I was like an engineering manager, and like Canonical didn't really have a lot in the way of engineering managers. And I got there, and I was like, "What are y'all working on?" And they said blueprints, etc. It was like really loosely managed, and so one of my big innovations that I brought to the team was that we would break down the work into what we called work items, and we would track them to see like whether we're on track to finish or not. A friend of mine named Alexander Sack described this like bringing the wheel to humanity. It was such a huge innovation for this like group of really loose hackers. And the thing that I really like about this is the first bit of code that I contributed, because I wrote the code that generated the burn down charts. And it actually ended up getting baked into Launchpad and et cetera. So right. But this, we never were able to, and I used to, like every cycle I'd say, you got done a certain number of work items last cycle, don't sign up for more this cycle. And just, they'd be like, oh, we can do it. And like every cycle I could never succeed in getting the team to be disciplined about how many work items to sign up for. So then skip 9.10, because the only thing that was interesting about 9.10 was that there was a Gwibber. Wow. What it was? Gwibber. Yeah. The which title bars? Yeah, there was the theme got tweaked there, and I also think there was a bug in the Intel x86 drivers that made Compiz freeze, and we had to like blacklist like the open source drivers like at the last minute. What's that? Oh, I left Ubuntu 1 out of this, so that's, maybe I shouldn't have. Anyway, I want to skip ahead to 10.04 because this is like when we switched from brown to purple, which was actually I think a welcome change for a lot of people, and it was fresh. And we're still, I think, orange and purple. I think we're still riding that today. But then for me, one of the big things was quickly. Well, the reason I got into join Canonical was because I wanted to solve the app developer conundrum, which I never did, by the way. Other people have since then, but I found it very frustrating to write Linux applications for a couple of reasons. First of all, I never knew what to do. Like everybody was pushing their pet technologies, and there was no like standard way to do it. And then by the time I did get something written, it's like, oh sure, now just like write this incredibly difficult to write Debian package, which by the way you did wrong, so we're not going to accept it. And then oh, by the way, now it doesn't work because we changed all the dependencies for you as a huge favor to you. So now you can spend the next 6 months just trying to catch up to where you were 6 months ago, which, by the way, isn't going to work anyway because you chose deprecated technology, which is like, so this is like just driving me crazy. This is before I joined Canonical. So one day in the job before Canonical, I was swimming laps, and I thought, like, wouldn't it be nice if we had something kind of like Ruby on Rails for development? And so I thought of this project. I started it. We ended up calling it Quickly, which I think Ken Van Dyne semi-named it. He gave it a slightly less PC name. And then our now CEO, Jane Silver, thought Quickly was actually a better name because it's cool because you could issue commands. Quickly made a nice adverb. So you'd say quickly, create, and then your project. I'll refer to this later. Quickly is dead now, but we had a lot of fun with it, and it did unlock a lot of developers. And so this was started about this like 10.04 time frame. And then 10.10 came out, Maverick Meerkat. And then at this point, Quickly was pretty well established and developed. And I wrote this tutorial for how to write a media player using Quickly. The other thing that we did at this time was we made it possible with Quickly to just easily put into a PPA. There was a command called Quickly Share. So you could write your app, put it in a PPA, and so you could actually get it to people. So for the first time, it was like easy to write an app and share it with users. This tutorial took me like a few weeks to write, but it ended up being shared a lot and used a lot, and it inspired a lot of people to write applications. And I saw a lot of applications being based on it. I saw some of the bugs in my code then being like duplicated in other people's code and stuff. It also came quickly at this point, had a set of widgets, which I originally called Quidgets, but I had to change it to Quickly Widgets because there was some guy who was trying to sell something called Quidgets, which were like things like trivia games for web pages, and he kept threatening to sue me, and I kept writing it back and say like they're totally different, like, and it just got annoying, so I changed it from Quidgets to Quickly Widgets just so he'd stop sending me these letters. So those were good times. At this point, we were developing a lot on the desktop, and we had something called the Ubuntu Netbook Remix. And this, we were trying to like, okay, all this code, we should bring it like to the desktop, make a modern desktop experience. This is Unity. We had been talking about Unity a lot, but at this point, 1104, we're saying like, you know, we gotta get serious and make Unity land, like, and make it really good. There's another thread that was starting right now, which I don't know if people will remember, but people, like the main feedback that I was getting about the desktop was just like, I just wish it was more stable. Like there's regressions every release and it's not as stable as it should be. And like that was the main thing that I was getting as input from the community. So at this UDS, I try to rally everyone around 5 things. Like we're gonna make Unity and make it good, but we still have to have a 2D experience. At the time, not everyone was capable of running 3D graphics. So having a desktop environment that could only run 3D graphics would lock out people. And then the third theme was about the software center. So it's like now everyone can write applications, but now we have to make it so that they don't have to use the PPAs. They can get them into the software center. Then testing. So at this point, I started to get serious working with the teams about how can we verify our quality, right, and get better and better. You'll see this start to recur. And then contributions, like continually nurture the community of contributors, bring in more contributors, always be growing that. We started to grow the community team at this point, and et cetera. So I was big into gimmicks at the time, and since there were 5 of them, I wrote them on my hand, and I used that at UDS for them. Anywho, good time. So this was, does anyone recognize this? This was a spider diagram that I used as we were tracking Unity development to give feedback to the team that was developing Unity for how ready it was. So I said to be ready to land when it reaches this yellow shape. Right now it's at this blue shape. You know, the last release it was at this orange shape. So this was like our first effort to really try to systematically measure the quality or the suitability of something. Of course, it wasn't systematic. The way these numbers were assigned was that I assigned them in a spreadsheet. But at least it was like a, you know, giving targets to the team for what are the different aspects of quality that they should be shooting for. You can see now we're really transitioning into a development organization, and we're starting to develop some rigor. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Unity's been written 3 times now. First it was written in Clutter, and then it was rewritten into our own toolkit. No, we had our own toolkit for our yeah, we had a toolkit called Nux. And then now we finally adopted QML, which has been turned out to be a great choice. Okay, and then the other thing was like at this point we were just hilariously popular. Like everyone like Ubuntu was everywhere at this point. We have even more users now, but at this point it was like this. It was more amazing and new, and so when we released it, the day that we released 11.04, if you went to Google Maps outside where the canonical buildings were, they put a narwhal in the Thames River right outside of the Millbank building, because that's where it was the Natty Narwhal. So that was a little nod from Google, because I don't know if you might not know, but Google's engineers, they are heavy users of Ubuntu. They're one of our biggest, most intense user bases. And then the other thing that came out in this release was you could get your applications into the software center. This turned out not to work very well. Like there was a lot of contention between the community and me and a few other people. Well, some portions of the community and me and some other people. Like I wanted it to be very, very easy to get your application onto the desktop so people could use it and sell it. But we had a long history coming from being a derivative of Debian and Debian developers, where software gets vetted by professional system builders. And this tension was not resolved at this point. And so it was hard to get apps in. We ended up having to have a review board that would review the apps. But like so many more people wanted to submit apps and was actually capable to review that this system never quite gelled on the desktop. So Oneric, here's a cool picture, 11.10. Gosh, 2011 now. And then finally to 12.04. So 12.04 was a really big deal for us. And it was a big deal for me personally for a couple of reasons. One thing, I was spending a year in France, which meant I had this whole different view of Ubuntu because I was in a different time zone. I'd gone from the west coast of the US to the middle of Europe, and there's totally different people awake and working at that time. And they were like way more of them, and they were way friendlier. And but also at this point, we were very focused on making a rock solid release. Like that was like I woke up every morning early, and don't forget I was in Europe, so it was way before anyone woke up. I'd look for any problem that anybody had introduced into 12.04 during the day. And then when they got online, if they had caused the problem, they would hear from me. I was the director at this point in time. So it'd be like their boss's boss. Like you get online and your boss's boss pings you immediately and says like, you broke the build last night. And so that took about 2 months, and then everyone got the message that like you can't break the build. So this shows Checkbox, which is a tool that we still use. It's been rewritten a couple times, that you could constantly use to check whether Ubuntu is working on a particular piece of hardware. So we generated a lot of bug reports and solved them from that. This shows a picture of our autopilot run. So one of the things is we told everyone who develops software within Canonical, we will not put it on the desktop unless you have automated tests, and that those automated tests are passing. So a lot of effort then went into making automated tests and running them. And so for the first time, we didn't have a big footprint of tests. Like today, we have a huge footprint of automated tests. We had a small footprint of automated tests, but it was the first time we could go in every day and there was some automated measure. For instance, we had a boot test. Like I didn't show that here, but you could get on and say, did the device boot in the lab last night? Or, and then we had install test, upgrader test, so basic things that you would need to keep developing. So during the development of 12.04 was the first time that it was really usable during the development process. And a lot of it was do that vigilance every day, making sure it was still usable. That glass of beer at the bottom, that was what Martin Pitt made a web page that reported on anything that failed to build or anything that was that was incompatible in the archive, inconsistent in the archive. They're called archive inconsistencies. So that'd be like, X has two parts that are incompatible. If you upgrade now, it'll get installed. It'll uninstall X because they're incompatible. This used to be a regular occurrence during the development release. And so what we do is we'd always have somebody who was in charge of spending the day fixing all those. And when they were fixed, it would show beer instead of a list of broken things. So I'd love to wake up in the morning and see that there was a glass of beer there instead of a list of broken packages, which I would then have to follow up with the people for why they broke them. This is why you can use the development release today, because we called it daily quality, and everyone started rallying around, and then we found we could go much faster, because if somebody wasn't uploading code that broke the desktop, then you could keep developing that day on the desktop and not have to wait. What would happen before is like somebody would break X and it would take like 3 days to fix. So everyone would develop in a branch, and then 4 days later, everyone would try to merge their code together, but 4 days had gone by, everyone had changed all their assumptions, and then it was hard, something else would be broken. And then there'd be another 2 days to sort that out. And so it would only be by the time we got to the alpha, where we stopped all development for a week or two, that we could actually start using it. So this meant we didn't have to stop for alphas. We could keep developing right up until the day the alpha went out, and everyone could develop every day. So we're going faster and faster at this point. This was an image from a presentation that I did at the UDS when we were planning for 1204. I was trying to say, like, we can be beautiful and rock solid at the same time. Like, they're not incompatible notions. It seems obvious now, but there was actually quite a bit of effort trying to convince people that like daily quality was worthwhile, that we shouldn't wait until the alphas to try to make everything work, that we can have a development release that everyone can use every day. Fortunately, certain people like Martin Pitt, Colin Watson, like very influential developers, immediately got it and started contributing, and it made it, to their influence, made it work. So the 1204 desktop came out, and it was, to that point, it was the most robust desktop that we had. It was measurable in many ways. It was most robust. It was the second most robust one we've ever had. 1404 is the most robust desktop we've ever had. Oh, are you enjoying the stability on the LTSs? We also, at this point, extended LTS support for 5 years so that you could stay on 1204 for 5 years. So we gave everyone like rock solid desktop. You don't have to update. You don't have to upgrade from it. All right, and then, so that was great. I was living in France. Life was awesome. And then 1210 came out, which was a good release also, since we were building on 1204. But then so here's everyone at, I think this is Copenhagen. Like, look how much bigger it is. And like, not even everyone's there. Like, but then we had some things that came out in this time frame. I don't know if people remember, but we thought it would be cool if we added capabilities to the scopes, the search features, which included Amazon search results. And this was not met with universal approval. I don't know, I thought I'd get more reaction from that, that euphemism. So this is like really us, like canonical Ubuntu experimenting with blurring the lines between the internet and the client, which actually other devices were already doing. Like at this point, you would expect a device to do a wide search, and every other big desktop already had features like this, and of course every phone did also. So we've actually, on the next version of scopes, we've like thought a lot about how scopes work and developed them for the phone and developed them for tablets, and now back to the desktop. So some of the things that really annoyed people about this are actually just moot in the new design. So anyway, good time. The barbecue? What? Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. We moved the controls to the left side of the screen. That was also the end of the world. And that was Mark leading the design team, made that decision, then went on holiday. And so, like, the community burned down. It was like pitchforks and torches, and it was hard to respond to because it was a design decision. So Mark handled it when he got back. You very rarely hear about this anymore. Like, it's I knew it was just a matter of time. And in fact, it was not hard to put them back if for whatever reason you're somehow physically incapable of using them on the left. All right, so this this represents actually what was a big turning point, I think, for Ubuntu, or like actually showed like how things had changed when we got to 12.04. But the first thing that I learned here was that not everyone knows what the road movies are. So I started to use like the road to 14.04, like this 12.04, and we're talking about 2 years ahead. And I was using the road movies as examples, and nobody was impolite enough to tell me that nobody understood the reference. So if you haven't seen the road movies, this is very much your loss. I suggest that you go fix it. Anywho, but what it really showed was that we were able to plan out between 12.04 and 14.04. So what does this mean? Like, we have professionalized at this point planning of the product and what we're going to do, that it made UDS kind of weird. Like, when Ubuntu was young, UDS was where we really didn't know what was going to happen for the next 6 months. And so we would have discussions there. People who were not at UDS were often frustrated because they didn't know why certain decisions were made. It felt it was opaque. There wasn't a feeling of transparency, but it was following like a community process, and it was transparent if you were able to go. But over time, we'd show up at UDS and we'd actually already made the pertinent decisions many months ago, right? Like, sometimes transparently, never not. If it wasn't transparent, it wasn't intentionally not transparently, So at this point, we realized that we really needed to work on the transparency of our decision-making process. And I really did start to push that. I started to push Jono at the time to help us with that. But it also meant that UDS had a very different flavor to it. It was starting to become kind of a messaging event for a lot of people. And it was also huge. So it was super expensive, and we weren't planning. And so this was kind of a sad point, I think, in the development of Ubuntu, where like UDSs just weren't functioning for us on multiple dimensions. So we stopped having that event. There's talk about having another big one soon at another big milestone, which I'm excited about. But at this point, we decided we should I wanted to do UDS every month, but I got some, like, people said we should do it every 3 months, and we'll do it online. And I still think there's a lot of sadness in the community about not having that every 6-month touch point. We get to go somewhere exotic, we get to hang out, and we get to drink. But that like social element of it, while it was so important, was like not the overriding function. So I think the virtual UDSs are working for the planning part, but I do think the social community aspect of it, like, we're experimenting with different ways to bring it back. For instance, like having events like UbuCons and such. But it is nice. Like, I was able to present at 12.04 at the UDS. This is like what we think is going to happen over the years. I'm not going to brag and say that most of it happened, but okay. So now let's go to 13.04. We're going to hop ahead to 13.04. This is when really things started to change, especially if you worked inside a canonical. So this is when Mark started talking about convergence. We have one OS, it's going to run on all devices. He was saying, like, listen, desktops are interesting, they're good, and they're useful, but an operating system needs to run on the devices that people are using. Not everyone's using desktops anymore. So if we want to be relevant, like, we have a chance to be more relevant than any other operating system because we can run everywhere. And so these are like early mock-ups of those experiences. This is 1304. We started to really talk about phones and tablets. Absolutely. That's it's. I should have mentioned, like, Unity was specifically called Unity because it would unify the interface for all your devices, which is, and it's like, he was right. Like, I have a phone, I have a tablet, I have a desktop, and there's very intuitive to move between them. And when I gave my daughter an Ubuntu phone, she said, "Oh, it's just like the desktop." Like, and there's other besides, so Unity is part of the Convergence story. There's also just having just the same code is less to maintain, and so you can maintain it better. And another aspect of it is, as an application developer, you can run one application that can have a user interface that runs on all these different environments. Also turning out to be very prescient. Like I really admire Mark's insights into what was going to happen, and in fact has happened, and steering us towards developing along that path. At this point, I was like I had been managing a desktop. Like, my goal when I was engineering manager on the, so when I joined the desktop team in 2008, my job was to make Ubuntu the most popular open source desktop, which it already was. So it was a really fun job, did not have the challenges, which then the ensuing challenges that we faced and then since overcome with making a phone, tablet, and in fact a convergent OS. So this is when this all started. Does anyone remember the Ubuntu Edge campaign? So this was huge for Ubuntu. It turned out not to get funded. Not really surprising considering the amount of funding that we were expecting, but it got everybody talking to us, like OEMs, carriers, people coming out of the woodwork saying, like, that's really cool. We love your vision. We want to work with you. And you can see the fruits today that we actually have customers that are selling Ubuntu phones to users and users using them. This is exciting times. I remember for the first day, I was like, we might do it. Like, it would have changed everything. Yeah, I would have loved to have been on that version of reality where we met the goal. So what happened was we asked for some ludicrous amount of money from Kickstarter. If we get this funded, we will make this incredibly nice device. Like, the hardware is beautiful. Canonical will build this design. All the designs will be open source, and we'll make this amazing software for it. And then it missed by a fair amount, but it's still the standing record for the most money ever raised for a project like this. Who did? That's worthy. That sounds good. We need more bees. So, okay, he was saying a beehive recently broke our record. So I'm happy with that. Yeah. Okay. And so here is, this screenshot shows what I was doing. I spend a lot of my free time as a community member and a developer for Ubuntu, as anyone who follows me on Google Plus or used to read my blog knows. So here is like an early version of Qt Creator, and it's able to attach to a device. So, and then here's a couple of these are screenshots from an early app that I wrote. So we decided this is when Quickly really died, because we said everyone's going to write apps in QML, and we're going to have an SDK, we're going to have an IDE, everything everyone wanted, it's going to be based on Qt and QML. And in fact, the shell itself will be written in QML, the Unity shell. So everything started coming together at this point, much more professional, single entry points, much more intuitive if you want to develop how to go. Suddenly we were able to delete tons of doc pages and go deeper on the docs that we cared about. So good times. I still love writing writing apps for the phone, since I do use my phone a lot. So this was like really early. So I had a Nexus 4, and I had an Android device. And this shows, I put this on my blog the day that I got rid of my Android device. I took my SIM card and got it clipped down to be small and put in my Nexus 4. So that stands for dog fooding. I was working in a co-working space. And then I remember the day we got sort of a Gwibberish function running on it. Yeah, we were super. So this is like May 2013. I think I was the first full-time Ubuntu phone user. I started using it like crazy. To get online, I had to open the terminal and issue a command to the network manager to tell it to get data. But that's okay, I could live with it. I had a list of things that I needed. I need to be able to make calls, get texts, get online. There's a terminal. I think this is one of the things that really makes the phone special, is that, like, this super early version of the terminal, but it is just Ubuntu. Granted, it's a read-only version of Ubuntu. Talk about it a bit later, but it's just Ubuntu. In fact, you can make it read write, and you can do anything you want with it. Like, it's your phone, sort of like unlocking it. I don't like to call it unlock, because it's actually like yeah, it's not, yeah, it's like opening a door that's not locked. But keep the door shut most of the time, you'll be a lot happier. But if you want to do something crazy with your phone, you can. And it's easy to get it back to the old state if you do something damaging to it. But so having a phone that had a terminal with it by default was big. And I think if you buy a phone, the terminal doesn't come with it by default. You have to install it by the store. Yeah. And there was no security at this point or anything at this point. So now it's like very locked down and secure. You can't actually use the terminal without putting your password in and stuff. But and then this was another interesting time. I had a hard time trying to think of how to visualize this. I had a really bad spring in 2013 because I thought, for various reasons, besides the fact that like UDS wasn't working for us, it was costing too much. We should be planning more transparently, a better way. That also we should stop releasing the interim releases and go to a rolling release, which I rolled out this idea in less than a socially adept manner. And a lot of people got really mad at me. Anyway, it ended up not working out for various reasons. But I don't know if you remember, like, there was a lot of like, oh, is Ubuntu going to be a rolling release, etc. I personally started all that ambiguity. After the world caught on fire and everything burned away, Mark Shuttleworth came in and like set it straight as the benevolent dictator that he is. We got everything set up again, but it was a really bad time because people were really mad at me for even suggesting this. I know, and the first thing that got all these people were like, yeah, this is a great idea. And I was like, oh, excellent. And then like an hour later, man, when the internet hates you, the internet hates you. I mean, it's just, God, the people just have no idea how stressful that is until you've been in the foveal vision of people on the internet who think that's right. Something really good did come out of it. Well, in addition to the all the work that we've been doing on the daily quality, now you can specify that your computer is not bound to a specific release. It's just specified to devel, which means that you will never like upgrade. You'll always, like, your computer will always just be on the latest version of the archive, which I personally do on some of my computers just so that I'm always up to date. Okay, so then 1310 was a big release because 1310 was the first version of the phone that was really usable end to end. Like, we had media, everything you needed. We specified some things. 1310 will be successful when you can go to a scope, click on a video, watch the video, click on a scope, go to music, listen to the music. That you can click on the scope, go to the web browser. Like, all like these kinds of scenarios working end to end relatively robustly. Note, by this point, we had forgotten about updates. Not in the sense that we forgot to do it, but we had made the update mechanism so reliable that people just stopped worrying about updating their phones. And to this day, we haven't had a bricked phone. Like, we've rolled out thousands and thousands and thousands of updates to the OS with no issues at this point. Well, today, at this point, it was just thousands, I guess, because there weren't that many people using it in the wild. So 1310 was a really big release because we managed to get like a very usable phone that was reasonably complete enough for phone manufacturers to start thinking, maybe we should ship this. Which, Trusty, just wanted to touch on Trusty because this is our most stable desktop yet. A lot of people are using Trusty. A lot of development happens on Trusty. It's interesting, we see a lot of developers are on Trusty, but they're running 1504 server in VMs. So they're doing like they use their host is Trusty, and then they do actually all their development against a later version of a VM. Or often they'll have Trusty on their desktop and Trusty in a VM, but then they'll have all the crazy latest software that they're using in those VMs. So like today, as a developer desktop, 1404 is very widespread. And as a development environment, if you include all the virtual machines, it's insanely well spread. There's something called Vagrant, which is it's basically a way of running a virtual image that is in tremendous use on the Mac. So a lot of developers at my co-working spaces and stuff develop on a Mac, but they're really developing against Ubuntu 1404 in a VM. Often with like the latest version of whatever server software or services that they're running. So this is now we're getting close. We're 1504 now. This is 1410. So, there's Trusty Tar came out, like the logo. But what big deal about 1410 was like, this was the version on which we delivered to BQ an image which they put on these devices and actually sold. So this was for the first time only in Europe, people in Europe could go to the BQ website and buy phones. And we had these flash sales to try to, I don't know why they did the flash sales, but I think it was a lot around just like controlling the pipeline, knowing how many devices to have, how many to go out, and they turned out to be a huge hit. And I track a lot of the people who bought BQs are still using them. They're still in the wild. BQ is now wants to do more devices with us. They've already announced some of them, and Meizu wants to do phones too. So the phone is really taking root. But something interesting happened on the way to Vivid, which is that we wrote all this phone code. And the phone code has some special qualities. It's a very reliable operating system in the sense that it's read-only. So it's hard to corrupt it. Because it's read-only, we always know the state of the operating system on the device, which makes it easy to update. So we have these, we call it like binary update. When we update it, we only update just the specific pieces that changed and the specific files. So like, instead of having to update a whole package and everything in a package, you only have to update the file in that package that actually changed. And then we had something called transactional updates, where we would try to apply the update. And if for some reason the update didn't apply, the system could roll back the updates. So either it applied or it didn't. You'd never end up, has anyone ever ended up on their desktop where the update didn't work all the way and a couple people? Like, this can't happen on the phone. It'll just roll back. Try again the next time that you're up. Transactional updates. We also introduced something at this point for phones called click packages. And a click package is it's a glorified zip file, and it's got everything that the application needs in it to run, including a manifest of what it requires from the system, including the code, including whatever assets. So if you have libraries that aren't provided by the system, you put it in your click package. It's a self-contained unit. Also gets updated in a transactional manner. Since they are so self-contained, we were able to take AppArmor and wrap it around every package. This was not happenstance. They were intentionally designed together. What AppArmor does when it runs a click file is it ensures that that file only has access to what it's allowed to have access to. And so it's extremely secure. So now we have a very secure, very robust system. And people started to be interested in this code base for other kinds of devices. People started coming to us and saying, could we make this out of it? Could we make that out of it? And we realized that we had a code base on our hand that was generally very, very useful. And has anyone here heard of Snappy? So this is what Snappy Ubuntu Core is. It's an evolution of the phone code base into that Ubuntu Core like UI-less world. And there were some changes that we needed to make. For instance, when we wrote the tools for making a phone image, we always kind of thought we'd be the ones making the image. But people who are making devices, they want to make the image. So our tools had to be a little less arcane and comprehensible to them. Some of the formats that we used, files that we used, we had always assumed that would be like one computer talking to another computer, and it would never be a human authoring them. But when you're making devices, sometimes a human authors it. So we needed to change some file format specifications. There's a lot more that goes into changing Snappy, but it's really an evolution of the touch code base. So that if you're running Snappy anywhere, you may notice like, wow, it's like really reliable, really well designed, really simple. That's because it's actually got all these years of phone development behind it. It's got the same model of, we call them snap packages instead of click packages. Call it Snappy. Touch doesn't really make sense as a code name for a device that doesn't have a UI. So this is the world as it looks today. We have three big code bases, basically. One is the touch code base, which is powering tablets and phones, of course. And we also have something called the Desktop Next, which is an experimental desktop, which is running the touch code base on desktops. Then we have the evolution of touch called Snappy, and that we have a version that runs on the BeagleBone that we support. There's a community-supported version for the Raspberry Pi, bunch of other devices. The Raspberry Pi 2, sorry, yeah, that's actually an important clarification to make. So the Raspberry Pi 2 is well supported by the community. In fact, many canonical developers are in the community that supports it. There's a bunch of other boards that are supported as well. And of course, there's an AMD 64 version, soon to be a 32-bit version for Intel devices. So you can run Snappy everywhere. I'm actually running it at home, and it's really fun. I have a BeagleBone and a Raspberry Pi, and I also run it in VMs when I develop. So there's Touch, Snappy, and the Deb version to make the desktop. And I think the Deb version of the desktop is going to be very persistent because it's very useful for many, many people to be able to have the fine-grained control of their desktop that you get with Debian. Right? As soon as it's read-write, as soon as it's read-only, it can be very hard to customize your package set to like that level of depth that you want. Now, if you are a developer and you are personally like configuring and maintaining your system, that's fine, right? If you're a developer and you have 1 million devices, which you know, 1 million people have, you really don't want them configuring them like too much, right? Any more than is like very tightly controlled. So I think like the deb version is going to be very persistent. Like I don't think we'll ever get rid of it. I don't think the deb version will ever go away. And developers will be using it forever, I hope. So what we're shooting for 1604 though is to simplify the world a bit. Again, the deb version, what I think you're going to see is that a lot of developers will be installing the deb version on their laptops and then using virtual machines to do snappy development or touch development or even traditional development. So then what we're doing now is we're actually moving all the stuff that we're making for Snappy back into touch. There's really no reason to have both those code bases. The only reason that we have them now is because we're actually shipping to end users, to customers out of 1504, out of that touch code base, and we don't want to stop and say, no, you can't have the phone until we're done this transition. But we are on, in a parallel effort to shipping, we're making the transition to that being part of Snappy. So I'm just kind of showing it as a derived relationship. You may hear people say Snappy Personal, and this is just sort of a vernacular for the version of Snappy that will then run tablets, phones, and some desktops. But then there's Snappy Ubuntu Core, which will run on devices which don't have a UI. So basically, well, actually, that don't have UI. That don't have a shell. So if you're making a kiosk or something like that, you'd use Snappy Core and just put your custom UI on it. But if you wanted a general purpose device that people could, you know, launch apps and manage apps on and that kind of thing, then you'd use Snappy Personal, which would basically come with Unity 8, which would be the biggest difference. So somebody asked me to talk a little bit about Snappy, so I added a few slides on it. So where do we see Snappy today? Where's all this interest coming from? So actually there's a few kinds of devices where we're seeing a lot of interest. A lot of people are building on it. One is on switches. So if you go into a like telephone company, ISP, like anyone who's got like big racks of switches, they want to run Snappy on that so that they can add functionality directly to the switch. Like, oh, we need a firewall. We'll just install the firewall right onto the operating system running the switch, for example. This is huge for them because in the past they bought a switch and they cannot change the functionality. So this huge device, which like is expensive, and then if they want to change the way that device works, they need to get a new device. It's like very hard to update. This is just, they just use a snap package and install it on the device, whether they buy that from someone else or develop it. Network appliances are also a place that we're seeing a lot of interest. And this is something that someone puts inside their network that does all kinds of different, there's all kinds of different things that it might do, but they typically want it to be very locked down and very easy to address and configure. IoT gateways, both industrial and the home. An IoT gateway is basically something that collects, loosely speaking, sensor data, and I say loosely speaking because it's not just thermometers, it's basically anything that can give input into the gateway. The gateway does what we call edge processing, which is figures out, oh, is there anything that I need to tell the cloud? The cloud, you know, can then provide different services like, you know, a place to look at the state of the device, or it can send messages. Typically, the gateway is also connected to something called effectors, like different, it can control different things that are attached to it, you know, and this something like a thermostat can be both, right? So like a thermostat can say, hey, gateway, it's getting hot in here, and that can upload it to the cloud, and or well, the gateway can say, well, let me see, is there anyone in the house? Okay, there's no one in the house. It doesn't matter. Or it can go out to the cloud and say, hey, it's getting hot. Do you want to do anything? And then you can say, you know what? Like, I'm going to be home in half an hour. Can you turn on the air conditioner so it's cool when I get home? And then the cloud can send it back to the device. And then the device, the gateway can then tell the thermostat, yeah, why don't you turn on the air conditioner? And so in that way, a device can be a sensor and an effector. Kiosks are another big area where people are interested in Snappy, and I'll show a little map of that later. But this is like fixed function devices. You see them everywhere. ATMs, museums, point of sales, this kind of thing. And robotics has been like a huge uptake. And there's something called ROS, which is a community that has a robotics sort of app development community, which is actually built on Ubuntu, and they're really excited about Snappy, and they're like stampeding over to Snappy. So this is just a little simplified architectural diagram to explain how Snappy is different from the traditional Deb Ubuntu. So each of these boxes is what we call a snap package format. It's like one interesting thing about the system is that it's all built out of snaps. So the kernel snap is dependent on the device that you're running. And there's something called the OS snap, and that is Ubuntu. The thing about the OS snap is it's always the same everywhere on every device, right? You can customize the kernel snap if you need to give it some special access to hardware, but you can never customize the OS. So that makes it very reliable for you if you're writing snaps on top. There's essentially two kinds of snaps that go on top. One is called a framework, which will deliver general purpose functionality, like access to a certain kind of sensor, and then the other is called an app. So if you look, here's how you can use that to build, say, a kiosk. Like you get the right kernel snap for your kiosk device. Say you want to build it on BeagleBone, you just get the BeagleBone image, comes with Ubuntu Core. Then you say snap install mir, which is our system compositor, and then you make a snap, your own snap, which is probably like a QML file or an HTML file that then gets run into it. And so that makes it very simple to make that. And then these are very easy to update from the store. All right, so I think I'm out of time. Is there time for questions? Or how much time is there for questions?
Depends on how hungry people are because lunch is next.
Oh, okay.
I've got one is Snappy working with the Internet of Things, and my company works with is a subsidiary of Legrand in Limoges, France, and we're doing lighting. And there's Google's out there. There's a thing called the All Scene Alliance, I think that Qualcomm started. Mm-hmm. And are those interacting with Snappy at all, or do you know? Have you heard?
So Google. So you asked, like, Google's talking about Internet of Things. His company works within the Internet of Things space, and Google has been talking about Internet of Things, and Qualcomm's been talking about All Scene. So the All Scene thing is very easy. Like that's really a communication format, and so it makes it so devices like your light bulb can talk to a gateway. And so then you would just install the All Scene Snap on top of your gateway, and then you could talk to all your light bulbs. Google has something they're developing called Brillo, which is an operating system, and then something called Weave, which is kind of like All Scene. So they're just introducing a new operating system and new standards, and it's just, let's go, let's compete. You can actually build with Snappy today, though. You don't, so. We can talk later. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm excited. My sister is going to be living in Berlin here in the next couple of years, so she'll maybe can get to an Ubuntu phone one way or the other. How about for America? Is it never coming here, or even in a Wi-Fi phone? That's all I want is a Wi-Fi.
So he's asking, is the Ubuntu phone ever coming here, and
Or just as a Wi-Fi phone?
even as a Wi-Fi phone? So, yeah, like I know that we're talking to like a lot of people that'll sell it in the U.S. I don't know how to put this. I don't run the phone business side, so I don't talk a lot. But I know we really want to release in the U.S. We really, really want to. There's like so many people. The people are clamoring for it here. In the meantime, you can get a Nexus 4, and we do a decent job of supporting that image. You have to be brave though, because we're always on the cutting edge on the Nexus 4. That's what we use as a reference image for developing. But it's really easy to install in the Nexus 4 too. You just have to put some tools on your laptop, issue a command, and it'll put it on your Nexus 4.
Boots.
Has the developer, the new developers that are coming in, have they changed their geographic location? Do you see a trend as, are we getting more European developers? Are we getting more, Asian developers coming in? You must see new developers come up.
We do. Like the developer community is growing. I can't.
China's become big now.
Yeah.
China Mobile, Ubuntu Chillin, and now the Meizu phones coming out.
Yeah.
So we're having a much bigger presence there than we have in the past.
Definitely. Well, I don't actually know if that's true or that we're aware of them, because they've always had a lot of events there and stuff. But definitely they're like hooking into the Ubuntu community, the wider worldwide community a lot more. I don't know. I think it's growing everywhere. Like, it's also nice to see a lot of younger people, a lot of college kids and stuff joining. So
I've got a question more relating to the general direction of Ubuntu. And I was kind of wondering why. I know that, Ubuntu recently adopted systemd across the board. And I'm kind of a systemd hater, but not a complete systemd hater. I see the advantages of it on the desktop and using it in desktop and mobile operating systems. But what caused that to happen? Because I know Shuttleworth at the beginning was like, no, this is not going to happen. We're not going to use systemd.
Right.
What changed the direction for Ubuntu?
For systemd?
Yes.
So essentially, Ubuntu feels a lot of affinity for Debian. We're a Debian derivative, and we hire a lot of Debian developers. A lot of Debian developers work for Ubuntu, and we didn't the init system is important. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to denigrate it, but nobody's going to be like, I love this phone because of the init system that it uses, right? Or so I think we didn't when Debian decided that they were going to go with systemd, Mark, I think very intelligently, I very much support his decision, said, it's just not worth the friction of being different than Debian in this one area. We won't get any benefit from it. I think he was very gracious in his, moving developers over to start working on systemd. So I think that's mostly it. There's just really no reason to be different than Debian in that version. Did I answer your question? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that. And I agree with you that on phones, desktops, laptops, I don't think it really matters. I do think the systemd adoption is going to greatly affect the server side of it. And I mean, I don't know how much you know of it, but the systemd adoption almost destroyed the Debian community.
I do. I saw that. Yeah. Are you a Debian developer or?
I'm a Debian package guy.
Yeah. That was a shame. Yeah. And then of course the irony is that Martin Pitt is now doing most of the work, and he works for Canonical. But
he needs help, by the way, if anyone's in Debian and wants to help package systemd.
It was really painful to watch. I'm sure it was even more painful to experience. Yeah. So, well, anything we can do to help move on.
Right. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, I guess you need to give away a shirt then.
Oh yeah. Oh man, that's gonna be hard. Only one?
You got a shirt and our Arduino you can give away. So, whose questions did you like?
I like them all. Nobody asked a bad question.
If you asked a question, raise your hand so that we remember which ones there were.
You can't make me choose. That's so wrong.
You can pick a number between 1 and 10 if you'd rather.
What?
Citrix Zen Server gives you everything you need to integrate, manage, and automate a virtual data center, all on an enterprise-class, cloud-proven virtual platform, and at a third of the cost of other solutions. But why even bother with virtualizing your server infrastructure in the first place? Well, let's say you have a traditional one server to one application architecture, but you're running out of resources and performance is suffering. Once you order new server hardware, you'll wait for delivery. Configure it, install your business application, stage and test the server, and finally, add it to your production farm. If you've been through this process before, you know it can take weeks or even months. You also know it's a manually intensive process that will burden your team every time you outgrow your current setup. With a virtual server solution, you could accomplish all of that in less than half a day. Server virtualization software separates the OS and application from the underlying server hardware. And with multiple virtual machines on a single server, you can use each of them to run different OSs and applications. This makes it possible to move your virtual machines from one piece of hardware to another whenever you want, to maximize utilization, simplify maintenance, or recover from a hardware failure, and without slowing down your applications or users. Clearly, server virtualization provides big benefits, and Citrix Zen Server provides even more. Since it's built on an open platform, Zen Server plays well with your existing hardware, storage systems, and IT management software, as well as with the industry's leading cloud service providers. Best of all, you can get started by downloading a fully functional, production-ready version of Zen Server for free. After a 10-minute installation process, you'll see how easy it is to start virtualizing your workloads and automating your IT management processes. And when you're ready for a richer set of management tools, just upgrade to one of the premium editions of Zen Server. So whether you're interested in virtualizing servers for the first time, expanding your server virtualization footprint, or moving server workloads to the cloud, download and install Zen Server today and see how it can help you simplify your IT environment. Citrix Zen Server. Do more. Don't spend more.
customers rely on your website or application. If it's slow or non-responsive, it infuriates your users and costs you money. Keeping your business-critical systems humming along requires insight into what they're doing. Your system metrics tell stories that can reveal performance bottlenecks, resource limitations, and other problems. But how do you keep an eye on all of your system's performance metrics in real time and record this data for later analysis? Enter Longview, the new way to see what's really going on under the hood. The Longview dashboard lets you visualize the status of all your systems, providing you with a bird's-eye view of your entire fleet. You can sort by CPU, memory, swap, processes load, and network usage. Click a specific system to access its individual dashboard, then click and drag to zoom in on choke points and get more detail. Comprehensive network data, including inbound and outbound traffic, is available on the Network tab, and disk writes and free space on the Disks tab, while the Process Explorer displays usage statistics for individual processes. The System Info tab shows listening services, active connections, and available updates. Adding Longview to a system is easy. Just click the button, copy the one-line installation command, then run the command on your Linux system to complete the process. The agent will begin collecting data and sending it to Longview. Then the graphs start rolling. Use Longview to gain visibility into your servers, so when your website or app heats up, it stays up.